Hello everybody, welcome to Chapter 19, Lesson 2. And today what we're taking a look at here is what happens to America's economy in the 1970s, particularly during the times of Presidents Nixon, Ford, and then President Carter. And we're taking a look at here, and I think the general premise that we'll have to look at here is what you can see above my head, which is that America's economic machine, which had been the top dog in terms of manufacturing in the world since 1900, is going to begin to slow. Now, that's not to say that our economy becomes smaller. What I'm talking here about is the rate at which we actually make things and sell things to other people. That is what we're actually talking about here. That rate is going to fall, even though we'll be able to have success doing other things as a country and consuming things and spending things and making, providing services. But the actual economy of making stuff in factories is going to go down. And the manufacturing in America is going to go into a number of different problems, a number of different issues that it's going to have here. And when we say the word manufacturing, remember that what we're talking about is making things in a factory. So here's a couple of the problems. One of those problems is what you're going to see here for number one, which is that our economy is heavily dependent upon foreign oil. Now, what does that mean? Imported oil. I have a chart here that I'm going to show you, have you take a look at here. And what this chart does is it shows you with the black line here that I'll trace over in blue. This is the total amount of oil that our country is using at any point in time, either in terms of producing it or bringing it in from another country. So it's all the oil that America has at her availability at any one point in time. I bring this up to you because I want to show you the colors that are down here below as well, and those are the colors that I'm going to highlight red. These colors is oil that is all imported from a group of countries that work together. And those countries are called the Organization for Petroleum Exporting Countries, also known as OPEC. So these countries all here, whether it's Ecuador or Algeria, Libya, Angola, all the questions and all the countries that you can see here being circled by my pointer, these are all member states of OPEC. And what they begin to do is use oil as a weapon. Now, if you look, most of those countries, especially a number of them, all produce oil in the Middle East, especially some of them like Iran and Iraq and Saudi Arabia, and so on and so forth. So they begin to use oil as a political weapon. In particular, what they were looking to do was use oil as a political weapon when war erupts between Syria, which you can see here, highlighted by my pointer, Egypt, which is right here, and Israel. And this war is called the Yom Kippur War. It happens in 1973. And what happens here is that OPEC says it's going to embargo or stop shipping petroleum to countries that support Israel. And of course, one of those countries around the world is the United States. This means that something's going to happen between 1973 and 1975. Oil prices are going to rise. And on the chart that you can see here to my right, the red line that goes over here is the cost of energy, the cost of oil production. And you can see here we hit this spot in 1973. It's relatively high, but then all of a sudden in 73, whoosh, it spikes way up. 1974, 1975, a tremendous increase in the cost of oil. And you can see that embargo. And what that means is if they're not shipping to us, America has to find some other place to get its oil from. So just imagine that all of that oil that I highlighted in here in red is no longer available for us. Well, where are we going to get our money? Or our oil, rather, right? We need to find some other way to handle this crisis. Now, what's going to happen here? Well, if the price of oil rises, that means that America's going to have less money to spend on anything else, and it's going to contribute to a recession because we're not going to be able to buy as much and buy the things that we produce. So we have one big problem so far with our economy. Our dependency on imported oil makes oil prices rise dramatically when they embargo. OPEC embargoes us, and it means that we're not going to have as much money to spend on other things. So our society, since it's heavily dependent on foreign oil, is really going to have to struggle here in its economy in the early 1970s. So we've got one problem with this dependency on foreign oil, and another problem is going to come from having factories that look like these all across America. And you go into any city around America, and these are the kinds of factories that you're going to see. Run down, decrepit, looks like they'd been built 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80 years ago. And you know what? For the most part, they have been built a really long time. Our manufacturing plants in the 1970s had become old and inefficient. They were built in the 1910s, 1920s, 1940s, 1950s. And, you know, they're 20, 30, 40, 50 years old. And the world has moved on. People are more efficient. They do things faster, better than we are. But American factories hadn't kept pace. So we had forgotten about that. We had forgotten that the prosperity our country saw in the 40s and 50s was due to the fact that we could make a lot because we had access to raw materials around the world. Look, by the 1970s, and you can see that with this chart that's just over here on the screen, we are importing more than we're exporting. Well, how do you know, Mr. D? Because anything below this line right here means that we are buying more than we're selling. We have to pay people more than they pay us. And you can see that right here it's about equal. We're selling about as much to the world as we are buying from the world. But right here in the 1970s it begins to dip and fight that line, and then and then it stays down, and then it gets a little better, and then man. And then it begins to tick back up again here in the late 2000s. So we are buying way more than we are selling to other countries. This is the evidence that we have a manufacturing base that isn't keeping up. And if we have so many people that are no longer in jobs making things, well then what is that going to look like to our unemployment rate? And that is right here. Right? 70, 72, right? And then, unemployment rate goes up, and then, unemployment rate goes up. And you can see a direct correlation between how much we buy from other places and the unemployment rate. I mean, look at that. You can see it almost overlaps, doesn't it? That little section right here. Because as America is making more, she has more of its people in work. And when it's not making as much, when it's buying from other places, unemployment goes up. So what you can see here pretty clearly, I feel like, as you look at this inverse relationship, what you can see here, I think, is just how much Americans are beginning to struggle. Because our economy has gone stagnant. It's gone stagnant. Consumer demand can't increase because unemployment is too high. But it's not high enough to make demand fall. Add in inflation to that, right? Because take a look at this, right? There's your inflation rate. You can see inflation going way up where the prices of goods go up and the value of money falls, right? We have all these things contributing to a disaster here in America. A strange kind of recession that's unique, that Americans really hadn't experienced before. And it's called stagflation. The concept behind this is that we have persistent inflation, right? When you saw that here with this costs going up. We have persistent inflation, and we have relatively high unemployment pretty much all the time. And we end up with economic stagnation, plus rising prices, or inflation, something called stagflation. And this isn't supposed to happen. We're not supposed to have high unemployment and rising prices. It's not supposed to happen. We're not supposed to have a recession, high unemployment, people not working, people not producing, right? And rising prices. Why? Why is it supposed to be that way? I put this little chart together to show you. I hope it makes some sense. So if unemployment rises, and that's right here. Let's just say for whatever reason, unemployment rises. Maybe because Americans are buying more from other countries, and they're not buying from factories here in America, so unemployment goes up. Well, if that's the case, then people have less money to spend because they're unemployed, right? And if people have less money to spend, well, demand is going to fall, and demand will fall because they have less money to spend, so we're not going to buy as much. And if demand falls, well, prices will fall because nobody's buying and people want to sell whatever it is they're making. Except that's not how this is working. Unemployment is rising, right? So check. People do have less to spend, check. But demand is not falling. Demand's not falling. Why? Because unemployment hasn't risen enough to cut demand, enough to make prices fall. So demand, while it does stop rising, it just kind of flattens out. And when demand flattens out, people are still spending, but they're not spending enough to get employment back to work. It's just kind of like everything's kind of like frozen in place. Add to that, of course, right? There's something else to add to that, right? This whole chaos of this whole thing. Add to that this whole business of OPEC and inflation of oil prices. Well, and we're going to be in big trouble. We're going to have stagflation, rising prices thanks to the oil. We have high unemployment, but not high enough, right? So what we have there is all of those kinds of things, and then we want to add into that nothing any of these presidents does works. Nixon and Ford, they try all kinds of things. Spending cuts, tax increases, cutting interest rates, nothing works. America stays stuck in this stagflation. It's a pretty messy situation for us to be in. Yeah, I think you can understand why then Jimmy Carter is going to be able to say, you know what, I'm a Democrat, I'm from the South, I'm from Georgia, I'm a governor, I'm an outsider, I'm not one of these people like Nixon or Ford who've been corrupt, who have lied to Americans, this whole business with Watergate. That's not me. That's not me. I'm a good guy. I know what the problem is. The problem is our dependency on foreign oil. I mean, look at this puppy, right? We got to get off this foreign oil. You elect me, I'm going to promote environmentalism. I'm going to promote renewable energy. Vote for me. Get America back on track. Because what we really need to do here is we need to get our economy going big time. And Jimmy Carter is going to be elected as he wins as an outsider. And as president, he's going to want to break that dependency on foreign oil, which he views as one of those causes of stagflation because it's keeping prices high. So Carter says, you know what, we need solar, we need renewable energy, we need to use coal, we need to use anything that we have here in America to offset this imported oil. And coal power becomes huge, nuclear power becomes huge, solar, wind begin to play a role in American energy production. Department of Energy comes along and better regulates energy consumption. And all of these things are done to try and help America break its dependency on foreign oil. And you can see that actually does happen, right? You can see that in that image that we have, right, that Carter has shown us. In that image being that, over here, bring it up real quick, there it is. In that image that if you look at it, you can see that our dependency on foreign oil, and I'll circle it, it begins to shrink in the late 70s when Jimmy Carter is in office because we're using coal and solar and some of these other kinds of places. But it's just too much change too fast for Americans. It's too expensive to put in solar panels on your house. It's not efficient. So it's not going to last, that transformation of our economy into using different kinds of energy, including coal or nuclear. It's going to change, and we're going to see that kind of dependency on foreign oil go back up into the late 2000s when that dependency begins to fall again. So all of this, change, which is important, and Carter does, help us out a little bit. It's just not going to be quite enough to get us all the way out of stagflation, unfortunately. And while you can certainly give Carter credit for getting us off foreign oil, he is not going to be able to break stagflation, and he's going to have some trouble with our economy. Another area where he is kind of mixed review is going to be his foreign policy. What we're going to see here is really some attempts of turning away from détente. And what Carter is going to say is that America should be right, honest, true, and decent in how it deals with other nations. Enough with the lies, enough with the scandals, enough with the revolutions. We should be done with that. And Carter gives some examples of how he's going to do this. One example would be an old American protectorate, Panama. Remember, we had built the Panama Canal way back in like 1909, under Teddy Roosevelt, and he's going to say, you know what, we've held on to that for a really, really long time, like 70 years now, and it's not even in our country. So he'll sign the Panama Canal treaties to give the Panama Canal back to Panama from the United States. And again, it's from the United States back to Panama because, you know, it's in their country and it makes sense that they should be the ones to get it. As one example of being right and true. And another would be to say to the Soviets that, you know, we're not going to sit here and practice détente with you and share common interests, even if we have different objectives, when you go off invading other countries without any approval, like Afghanistan in 1979. And President Carter says, look, America knows better than any nation on earth what happens when you invade a country that doesn't want you there, right, for any reason. We just got out of Vietnam. So for the Soviets to then go in and invade Afghanistan and try and make that place communist, President Carter's going to say, you know what, no, we're not trading with you anymore. Enough with that détente train. We're not going to sell you any grain whatsoever. You can't get any food, as a for instance, in response to your invasion of Afghanistan, Soviet Union. And these are examples of where President Carter is going to have some successes and show that we don't have to have détente. We can be right and true. Other big successes for President Carter come in the Middle East, or with the Middle East, I should say, in that he is going to continue to try and do what's right and true, working for peace between Israel and its Arab neighbors. Remember, one of the things that we saw in the early 70s was that war between Egypt and Israel and Syria, and President Carter is going to say, we can't continue to have all of these different wars, and so what we need to do is we need a peace treaty, the Camp David Accords, a permanent peace treaty between Israel and Egypt, so that they will not go to war anymore. Who've been bitter enemies for decades. They'd fought at least 3 or 4 wars together, so we're not going to allow that to happen. Right? So we've got 3 really good examples of President Carter being successful in foreign policy, but there is an example of where we're not. And that's our support of this guy right here. This is Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, also called the Shah. He's a king. Shah is just his country's name for king. And he's king of Iran. And they're a major oil supplier to America, right? A dependency on foreign oil. They are a buffer against Soviet expansion into the Middle East. They don't want to be communist. But unfortunately, this monarch, this guy right above my head, he is incredibly unpopular. He is repressive. He kills people, puts them in jail without trial. He beats them, tortures them. His leadership is incredibly corrupt. And while the average person in Iran does okay, they could have been doing much better had his government not been nearly as corrupt. And over the period of 2 years, revolutions begin in Iran. So that all the way by December of 1979, the Shah has fled power. He is no longer in charge of Iran. And this man is the Ayatollah Khomeini. And he despises the United States because of our support of this corrupt monarch that stole money from his people with its corrupt government and its torturing and brutal ways. And as a result, the Ayatollah Khomeini, who's now in charge of Iran, is going to take hostages in Iran. Americans that are held for 444 days. They're held for over a year as hostages of the nation of Iran as punishment for our support until after Carter left office. So, you know, while Carter, with his right and true and just, does have some successes, there are places where he doesn't have success. And when we get back together in class, we'll take a look at all of this economic issues, some of these foreign policy issues with Carter, as we kind of get more into the 1970s.